Hi everyone! Welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're just joining in. So, this drawing I have today wasn't exactly one that was planned. It was just one of those cases where motivation had struck, but without the idea part, so you kind of just have to force anything out onto the paper, or in this case, tablet. That being said, since it was just on a bit of a whim, I don't really have any deep thinking topics to go along with it, so I'll just share a bit of the process instead, and hopefully that'll be just as exciting. I mentioned in one of my previous videos that I found myself in a bit of character rut, and while I'm not quite back to the 24/7 story thinking like I used to be, I have managed to pull myself out of that a bit through the power of revisiting magical girl OCs from middle school, but this time giving them a more interesting plot. That being said, this drawing doesn't have much to do with the plot itself, but I mostly just wanted to draw the main character looking pretty, so that's what I did. Other than knowing I wanted to draw her, I also knew that I wanted the art to have a mystical sort of vibe to it, like fairy-ish. So she's just chilling in her little fairy forest looking dramatic. I knew that I wanted to make sure to incorporate the background and foreground elements in the initial sketch because that's something I usually skip over and is probably partly to blame for why my backgrounds aren't always tied in super well and kind of just slapped on at the end. I did try to make the plants frame around her in like a circular sort of way because I thought that'd also add into the more mystical look. Additionally, I did want to keep the light source in mind because I wanted the light streaming through the trees thing going on. And then as for the character herself, I wound up just putting her in a really simple flowy dress instead of one of her usual outfits, mostly because I just wanted to do a lot of clothing folds just to practice that. And then I did also have fun painting in all the background elements, like the plants, which is nice because it let me give them proper attention instead of just trying to get it done quickly, because usually I'll try and rush through those things. The line art wasn't anything too out of the ordinary for me, though I did try to make her hair nice and flowy, as well as having some curl it to it. As I said earlier, I did want some folds in the fabric too, so I added those in here. I did go back in later as well to add some more solid inks to the line art, but other than her, I wound up painting everything else, so there's not a ton to the line art. For the coloring, I wanted to play around a bit with Clip Studio's Colorize feature, where you can have it guess how to color things. I opted to at least do the version where you can give it some guidelines so it knows which colors you want at least. It did turn out a bit messy and needed some correcting, but I do think it made the flats much more interesting at least, so I may try using it again in the future. From there, I just added in a few layers of shading. I tried using a few different shades of color for each part, and instead of blending them like usual, I used them in chunks. That's a coloring style I really like in other people's art, so I thought I'd give it a try. And then after I was done with the base shading on her, I went in to add a bit more detailing on the plants around her. On the more tan ones, I did a bit more blending, but on the green ones, I kept the coloring about the same as I did on her, with a few layers of colors chunked in. It did turn out a bit more textured though, due to the smaller line details. And then for the background bushes, I was going to have them green originally, but then opted for a more reddish purple because I thought it fitted much better. I think if I'd kept it green, the overall color palette wouldn't have been as cohesive, so I'm glad I chose to do it like that instead. And then from there, hopping back to the character, I added in purple on top and carved out the highlights. I thought this helped her fit in a bit better and is overall a nice and easy tactic to get some more dramatic lighting in my experience. This part, though, I did wind up blending out a bit in a few spots and not others just because I thought that was the best look for it. I also added in a bit of that same purple into the plants, again, to kind of make everything more cohesive. And then afterwards, I put in some pink highlights to match with the overlay I put in earlier, and I think the pink helped out a lot with the fairy vibes. And then at this point, I was just going back in and adding stronger light sources and shadows to everything. One of my art teachers from a few years ago always recommended more contrasting values for basically any piece, and I think that has stuck with me a bit, so I try to go back and add a lot of them in there most of the time. He definitely knew what he was doing, so his advice was always good to follow. And then I went back and added in her wings since they got pretty glossed over earlier. I used a Luna moth as the reference for these, and some more Luna moths get added in at the end. Getting a close look at them, I noticed that the moths have really interesting colors. They're pretty green, obviously, but the outliney parts on their wings have some both pretty dark purples, but also some really bright ones and some bright blues in there as well. So I wanted to try and make sure I captured that in the drawing. For the moths themselves, I used basically the same technique on their wings as I did on hers. I had fun drawing these guys too because they're all fluffy and they got those little stick legs. And I kind of just think moths are really cute, which might make me weird because I know they're one of those bugs that people don't like, but I do, even the regular brown ones. Not just the fancy ones. And after I was done with the moths, I just went back and cleaned up some of the spots that got a little messy in the coloring and shading. And that's about it on my process on this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, like it, so I know you like it. And if you have any thoughts on it, I'd like to hear them in the comments. Thank you!